In the Situation Room. John King USA starts right now.
Thanks, Wolf. Tonight's big political story, born in the USA. That means you're an American citizen, right? Well, it may not be that simple anymore thanks to immigration politics. A growing chorus of Republican lawmakers are demanding hearings to take another look at the 14th Amendment, which says anyone born here is a U.S. citizen. Those lawmakers say they're concerned about, have you heard these terms? Birthright citizenship, anchor babies, the practice of drop and leave. It's all the notion that illegal immigrants are crossing into the U.S. just to have babies here. And now there's even talk of changing the Constitution to end that practice. Some, at least, say they're considering it. The top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, said this today.
I think, having a hearing on that would be a good idea. I don't know what the potential solution to it is, but obviously it's a rather unseemly business, and I think we ought to have some hearings and take a look at it.
Now, he's talking about rich women from China flying here to have their babies in U.S. hospitals, but you won't be surprised to find other Republicans pointing at the babies of illegal immigrants who are Latino. Either way, the White House smells wedge-issue politics.
I don't know if that was based on 2010 or 2012, but my hunch is it's based purely on politics.
So do we really need a new baby amendment to the U.S. Constitution? With me tonight, Republican Representative Brian Bilbray of California, Democratic Representative Jim Moran of Virginia, CNN senior political analyst Gloria Borger, and CNN senior correspondent Joe Johns. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And Congressman Bilbray, let me start with you and begin by reading the 14th Amendment. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Why do you think the U.S. should change this?
We don't have to change it. The fact is if you remember, it said those born here and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And subject to the jurisdiction thereof was defined by the Supreme Court in the Elk case in 1872. That's why today the children of diplomats, the diplomats who are here legally on the U.S. soil, do not get automatic citizenship for their children because they're not subject to the jurisdiction. That is why in 1872 the Supreme Court ruled that even American Indians born on American soil did not fall under the definition of subject to the jurisdiction because they could not be tried for treason. So that application needs to be applied to millionaires coming here and trying to get automatic citizenship for their children. I think people would be outraged if we tried tourists as traders.
Let's break this down.
That's a real important conditioning clause there, Jessica.
What you're saying then, though, is that we need to clarify it by writing a law to explain who should and who should not be a citizen?
We should clarify the fact that those who are tourists do not fall under the category because they can't be tried for treason. Those who are permanent resident aliens who can be tried for treason if they are lawfully engaged in commerce here. The fact is that you can clarify these issues where even those who are illegally in the country but serving in the military, they are subject to the jurisdiction because they can be tried for treason. The obligation of loyalty, they subject to the jurisdiction, was the conditioning clause that the Supreme Court has ruled on it. And it's really just sort of a thing that we've ignored for so long, sort of like the people thinking that you have to be born in the United States to be president. Everybody knows now that no, you don't.
Treason,
McCain
not treason.
Wasn't born in the
Your
United
bottom
States.
line is there needs to be a law saying that if you are born of illegal immigrants who crossed here illegally, you are not a citizen. Is that correct?
No, I think that we've got to clarify that the 14th Amendment clarifies that there are those who qualify as subject to the jurisdiction, but if you're a tourist, if you're just visiting, if you're just traveling through, that does not qualify you as subject because you don't have the obligations that fall under those categories, and tourists and illegals don't fall under that, just like diplomats' children. So I don't hear the outrage about the children of diplomats not getting citizenship, and it took Congress in 1924 the ability to have American Indians to get automatic citizenship. They were not given it by the 14th Amendment, so how do you apply it to others?
I want to give Congressman Moran a chance to get in here. Sir, your view of this debate is what? We know that a number of senators, Republican senators, have now said it's worth holding hearings to consider whether the 14th Amendment should be changed or how it should be applied. Your views?
I'm sure they want to hold hearings, and they want to make sure they're televised, because this is about getting votes. This is about the upcoming election. It's not about changing the law. This particular amendment has a long history with the Supreme Court. It is clear that the intent is that people who were born in the United States are U.S. citizens. It was challenged because at one point people wanted to deny the children of slaves. Well, America realized that was wrong. They reversed it. That's why we have the 14th Amendment. So they're talking about changing the Constitution. That requires two-thirds of both houses of Congress. We can't get two-thirds of the Congress to agree on what day it is, and then three-quarters of the states. So this is purely about getting votes in the next election. It's not about changing the Constitution. It is about appealing to, you know, the bias against immigrants, obviously going after those who are undocumented. But it also is going to be subject to law of unintended consequences. It means everybody else has to prove that their parents were U.S. citizens when they were born in the United States.
Well, Gloria, let me ask you, because this obviously is a hot-button issue going into the election. Right. It requires two-thirds of both houses to change the Constitution and three-quarters of the states. And so why bring it up?
Well, because there is an election coming up, both in 2010 and in 2012. You know, with all due respect to Congressman Bilbray, there isn't great outrage out there about the children of diplomats and what happens to them. You know, this is a question about whether you want to repeal the 14th Amendment, which the Founding Fathers said we don't want to disenfranchise freed slaves. That is something that has been discussed in this country. Look, immigration is an easy issue to demagogue. We know that. That's why we don't have real... And the fact that you want to hold hearings is all about, okay, there's an election coming up. Senator Leahy has said, who runs the Judiciary Committee, we are not holding hearings before the election.
Okay, listen to this for a minute, Joe. I want you to listen. This is what Senator Lindsey Graham said last week when he floated the idea of a constitutional amendment. Let's listen to this soundbite.
I think it should be earned, it should be respected, and it should be an orderly process. And when we look at fixing immigration, I think we need to look at this as a piece of the puzzle.
All right, and he has, that was actually Sound Today to CNN, but he has said he would consider amending the Constitution. Now the other members like Mitch McConnell and Kyle and these other Republicans are saying, well, we should just talk about it. Right. So are Republicans a little skittish? They're not quite sure where they should be on this issue?
Sure, you don't know what vote you're going to get on, so let's hold a hearing. You know, I mean, come on, it's August. Right? It's a news vacuum. Right. There's not a lot to talk about. We're heading into a midterm. Let's get all excited about changing the 14th amendment to the Constitution. It's not going to happen. I mean, come on. But it is a good thing to talk about, and you can get people excited, and you can get your base to talk about going to the polls, and you can get ready for September. That's what's going on here, and it's fine. You know, it's American politics.
And Representative Bilbray, there's an interesting statistic I heard from the Pew Center. They said that 50,000 legal Latinos become old enough to vote every month. 50,000 new voters every month who are Latino. Now, does your party risk alienating those people, sending them into the arms of the Democratic Party if you continue to push these kinds of issues?
Jessica, I'm from San Diego. I know you don't need to tell me about Latinos and the impact on our communities. I grew up on the border. This is all part of it. If we try to alienate anyone, it's the one of abandoning the concept of the rule of law. If the Constitution doesn't need to be changed, if the rule of law doesn't allow the children of diplomats to get automatic citizenship, rich tourists shouldn't be able to come in and buy citizenship. That's what it's really about. And let me tell you something. I just went through my class reunion where the majority of my class were Latinos. And let me tell you, they were very upset about this argument of trying to say that Latinos do not believe in the rule of law and that immigration law is not important to the Latino community. Come down to my neighborhood down in the border and talk to them rather than sitting up in Virginia or up in New York or up in Chicago. Come down on the border and see the cost and people dying, families being destroyed by the illegal activity down here, and tell me that the Latino community isn't on our side.
Congressman Moran, you do not live in a border state, and yet your Attorney General decided yesterday that law enforcement officers are allowed to ask anybody to prove their immigration status when they're stopped for anything, no matter how small. What's your view of that?
Well, my view is the same as most of the law enforcement officers in the state. This is an added inconvenience at best. It's a great burden at worst. And again, it's a matter of profiling. It's a matter of subjective conjecture.
And is it about rich diplomats' kids?
Well, you know, I have to speak up for Brian. He's normally not this disingenuous when he's among us and he's back in Washington. It's only when he's out on the campaign trail. This is not about rich diplomats.
You know,
and everyone knows that.
I have to ask Congressman Bilbray, you know, do you want to create an entire generation of lawbreakers from the day they're born? I mean, what do you do about that? What do you do?
Wait a minute. Americans go all over the world, and we have our children. I was almost born in Guam. The fact is, because my father was a U.S. citizen,
let's not talk about tourists. Let's not talk about tourists and the children of diplomats. Let's talk about the larger group that Jessica was talking about.
Let me tell you directly, San Diego, where I ran the hospitals as a county supervisor, looking at that you had individuals with border crossing cards that would come over from Tijuana, and they do it today. They deliver at the hospitals as an emergency delivery. They qualify for automatic citizenship, even though they even live out of the country. But because they're there temporarily, they claim to get the citizenship, and then they qualify for the benefits. That is something today. This isn't abstract. This is those of us on the border. We see this every day. It's not just about illegal
and that's
immigrants.
The heart of this
it's about
debate.
People gaming the system. That's what it's really about. And it was never meant for people doing this. It was meant to protect slaves because they were obligated to the country.
We want to come back, but we've got to take a quick break right now. And there's another sensitive issue now that doesn't require changing the Constitution. It involves raising taxes. Next, who should pay more? And later on in the program, the breakup that has the political world buzzing. Stay with us. The White House is on edge about the Bush tax cuts, which expire at the end of this year. Here's Robert Gibbs today.
The president's viewpoint is protect our middle class, protect the middle class tax cuts, and let those for the wealthy expire.
Well, for Republicans, that's just not good enough. They vow a major battle to extend all the Bush-era tax cuts, including for the richest Americans. And if Congress does anything less, Republicans say they're poised to blast the president as another tax and spend Democrat. And you know how Democrats love that label. All right, and our panel is rejoining us. I want to put this one straight to you, Congressman Moran. Americans are worried about the deficit, but if Republicans label Democrats as tax and spend, how do you push back against that?
Well, I think we need to show some facts. And one of the facts is that when we had 39.6% tax rate on the wealthiest individuals in America, they took home more after-tax income than at any time in American history. And we also saw an expansion of 23 million jobs. It's not the tax code that is the disincentive. The problem is that people are saving more, they're buying less. We understand that. It's a reaction to the bubble that we experienced. But it's also a reality that our revenue now is less than 15% of our gross domestic product. It needs to be about 20.5% to balance the budget. You've got to make up that difference. Otherwise, it's our grandchildren who will make it up.
Well, Congressman Bilbray, your party has been talking all about fiscal discipline. Listen to the president last night in Atlanta.
They don't have a single idea that's different from George Bush's ideas. Not one. Instead, they're betting on amnesia.
All right, so you guys said that you learned the lesson from the Bush era, won't spend that much anymore, but now no changing the tax code. So is this amnesia?
Yeah, that's kind of look, it's getting more bizarre as people get desperate, but the real fact here, Jessica, it's interesting. I wasn't there when the tax cuts went in, but it was interesting that all I've heard and America's heard is that these tax cuts were only for the rich and only for the rich. And now that we're getting down to the short time, you're hearing now, oh, well, some of it was for middle class. There was a group of it. We didn't hear that before. It just shows you the inconsistency, the way Washington wants to sort of manipulate the numbers and the reality. The fact is, the big problem everyone knows with Washington is that Washington has an insatiable desire and for more money, you can never have enough. And it's literally sucking the oxygen out of the system. I was a local mayor and supervisor, and there was no way local government would ever be able to continue to absorb this much debt and continue to justify it, and then try to justify tax increases on top of it.
Let me put this to you, because the Republicans have consistently said nothing, no new programs without paying for it. But there's no pay for this tax extension. No. Is there a little political gamesmanship here?
Sure.
No, what we did in the, Jessica, in the 90s, what we said is that if you want to add more money to one category, you have to find the money in the category. And we actually ended up working out a coalition with Clinton about the fact that we're finally going to prove the American people that we can be trusted with the purse. And that means some real tough stuff like not
look, a couple of things. A couple of things. One is I was around when these tax cuts were enacted. And they were because we had something called a surplus, which nobody has heard of anymore. 2001, 2003, the theory was we want to give you back your money because we have too much of it, which is something we don't have now. Now, what the Democrats are trying to do is turn this deficit issue on its head and to say, okay, you want to extend all these tax cuts, that's fine, except you have to figure out a way to pay for it because we don't have any money, because if you extend them, you're costing over $2 trillion, that's with a T, trillion dollars.
Joe, listen to this ad, which I've been seeing playing nonstop, at least around here. Look at this.
Folks, America's economy is struggling, and Congress is about to make it a whole lot worse. Our nation faces a massive automatic tax increase at the end of this year when the Bush tax cuts expire. When that happens, your income taxes could increase by 10% or more. Capital gains taxes will jump over 30%. Taxes on dividends will more than double. It's not a pretty picture.
All right, Fred Thompson with a swanky new goatee.
Yeah.
But the message, who's that to?
Well, you know, I don't know exactly who it is. It's to everybody, and this is a big problem for Democrats because it's very hard to sell something like this during an election year. Tax cuts these are the things that Republicans do pretty well, and that's what they get votes for. And then you're going to turn around and say, we're going to let these tax cuts expire. Whoever doesn't get them is probably going to be mad. There's a reasonable assumption that they're going to be less likely to vote for the Democrats. So they're sort of in a rock and a hard place. Honestly, back right after Barack Obama got elected, there were a lot of Republican strategists telling me that they were waiting, salivating for this debate. This is the thing they want to do.
But, you know, I talked to a Democratic strategist who said, look, whenever we talk taxes, it's not good for us. And we know what we have to do here. People, when you poll them, say, we don't want tax cuts for the wealthy. But then when you actually let these tax cuts expire on the wealthy and raise taxes, the public doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
You're nodding in agreement, right? So it
We've
hurts.
got to take a break.
You guys.
We got to go. It's a lively debate. If it's lively here, that means it's going to be even livelier on the campaign trail. So thanks all for joining us. And coming back on the other side of the break, Bristol and Levi, they're back in the news. Hear what the teary young Palin has to say next.